Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the third video of the THS 402 guidelines, we will be talking about the writing itself of the thesis. So in the past video, we have talked about formatting, which is the way the thesis should look like and should be structured. Today we will start talking about 4 subsections of the thesis that we can also call headers or chapters, and what each of them should include. And this will be the introduction, the literature review, the methodology, and data analysis. So the first two, introduction and literature review, basically aim at providing a background for the issue. So it should clearly state the objectives of the article, and it should explain basically where are you coming from in what you're stating. The introduction is more about the conceptual issue, while the literature review, it is more in the past efforts that have been done in your specific field. Methodology and data analysis also sort of go together, because methodology is going to explain how are you going to run that study, both in the way the experiment is going to be designed and in the way the data is going to be treated, and the data analysis is going to represent how is the output of this treatment, of the statistical, most of the time, treatment of the data. So let us really shortly try to overview each of the chapters and what are their roles and how to structure them. So the introduction, first of all, has the purpose of providing background information. So this is because your reader is going to be a specialist, of course, in psychology, but might not be too familiar with your specific field. And this is because already in the field of psychology, there are so many subfields, so many areas of research, that you cannot expect the reader to know them all. So basically, you have to give for granted, of course, that he knows the basics of psychology. All the things that you have learned in your bachelor, you can give for granted that the reader will know. But anything beyond that, anything that goes in the specific topic, then you will have to introduce yourself, but without going too much in detail about the literature. Why? Because that is the job of the literature review chapter. So in the thesis guideline, there are very much broken down chunks of what an introduction should be made of. And the staff at my department has written down basically what each part should include. I will briefly list them up, and I refer you to the document of thesis guidelines to read them and to try to structure, to model your thesis after theirs. So the introduction is made up of these components. The first is the framing of the research, or the background. What is the point that is behind your specific topic? For example, a background could be the fact that you're having, for example, a high incidence of depression in a particular area. Or a background could be something that has happened, for example, the COVID pandemic. So just very much a very wide sort of context to what you're saying. Then we have the statement of the problem. The statement of the problem is what you in particular are going to talk about in your research, and this has better be very short, but it should be really one sentence, maximum one paragraph, but which explains the problem and why is it a problem, and really it gives the basis to understanding why you have started your research about it. So in the thesis guidelines for the statement of the problem, they are giving you some starting points. For example, you can start it by saying, I am studying, or in order to find out, or the so that my readers can, and they're giving an example. An example is, I am studying Muslim women's view of working in order to find out how this affects their home life so that my readers get more insights into this area. So this is just a very rough example that makes you understand that in 2 lines you can make your reader really understand the problem. This is the statement of the problem. But it is not enough to state that there is a problem. You have to then say, what are you aiming at doing, understanding, discovering, solving, even guiding? And this is where the aims and objectives session comes into play. So in the aims and objectives, you basically list the aims and objectives of the study, and this is basically what you're expecting to learn or to gain from this study. It is acceptable in this case to use bullet points, but it is always better to structure sentences. So your general aim is, I do not know, to improve the situation of Muslim women workers, or to understand better the situation of children during the COVID pandemic. And from this will stem out next point, which is research questions. Research question is one of the most important sections of your overall research. So you need to think about them in depth. They have to be short, easy to understand, and really to the point. The research questions are something that you will need to answer in your research, so they can't be vague. They have to be related to, of course, your background, your statement of the problem, your aims and objective, and they have to be something quantifiable. It also has to be something that you can measure with the type of research that you're doing. So once you have the questions, immediately after comes the hypothesis. The hypothesis is basically what you expect to be the answer of these questions. They are basically predictions. And this, again, please remember your studies in high school about the scientific process. Hypothesis is really a central point in the whole process. A hypothesis is something that you can disprove. That is the basic definition, but we will be a bit wider than that. Hypothesis is something that you can prove or disprove. For example, a hypothesis will be people that have less social interaction will be more prone to feeling depressed. That is one example. So, after you have stated your hypothesis in the introduction already, there are a couple more points that you must add. The first has to do with the significance and the implications of the study. And this is important because it gives your readers, in a certain way, a motivation to follow you through. And the significance and the implications of the study are also what, like, the community in a wider sense is gaining from what you're saying. Finally, last part of the introduction is the conceptual framework. The conceptual framework discusses basically what is the main idea, how do the variables go together, and you should add most probably a diagram to this, because a scheme really helps in conveying the whole point to your reader. So here we are having the components of the introduction. In your introduction, you should include all of these components, possibly with headers that are going to explain to you where exactly you are. And After you have done that, you should proceed to the second chapter, which is the literature review. Now, the literature review is much simpler in its structure, and again, should be divided into subheadings, but it is not as strict as the introduction, the way subheadings have to be included. And you should divide it into subheadings pertaining to the topic you are going to review. And please do include only relevant information. Like I said, when we were discussing the proposal, no? You know that students sometimes have the temptation of really showing that they have read a lot, that they've done a lot of effort, and therefore they tend to include more information than what is required. But here, really, only relevant information should be included, because otherwise your reader will start getting confused, and that will not be very helpful. And also, please, when you're writing the literature review, do not fall in the trap of wanting to just describe studies. So sometimes literature reviews are done like White and others found out that, and then there is another paragraph that is another author. Roosevelt and others found out that. And these are just lists of articles. This is incoherent and doesn't let the reader understand why are you listing these articles. If you just provide a list, what is the point? What is the bigger picture? So please always try to apply them to your topic area. That is very important. Third chapter here is methodology. Now, methodology is a very important chapter. And one insider tip, when we usually grade your thesis, we start from the methodology chapter. If this is sound, then we proceed. If this is not sound, most probably the thesis will not be passed. So pay a lot of attention to your methodology chapter. Sometimes I receive theses that have, mashallah, a great introduction. You can see that the literature review is on point. A lot of work has been done to understand the background. But the point here is that you want to have a result. You want to answer these questions. So therefore, for sure, you should have even stronger methodology. So let's try to understand here the elements that go into a good methodological chapter. So the first point is research design. Research design, again, if you do not remember this very much, I strongly remind you to go back to the course of research methodology, because it should explain to you all of these things. And concerning research design, here you should explain what are your variables, how did you divide your sample, was there a control group, did you randomize? So all the things that you have designed about the experiment. Immediately after, you should describe research methods. So the methods are more into the practical side. For example, if you recruited people at your local university, or what is the specific method? So did you use experiments or interviews? Which type of interviews? Did you observe the participant? And so on and so forth. Once you have said the method, for example, I used an interview, then you should explain what did you measure with that method. Because you're always measuring something in all these methods that we're mentioning. And so for the measurements, you should, for example, say if you used an existing questionnaire, explain whether it was a validated questionnaire or not, whether you modified it, and in case you designed your own questionnaire, please append it at the end of your thesis so we can have a look at it and develop it together with your supervisor, of course. And also, please explain which type of interviews were there. Was it on a Likert scale? Was it on a 3-point scale, 5-point scale? What kind of questions did the participant give? The sample should be described, meaning some very basic information. How many people did you take data from? What were their main age? How many males, how many females from there? specific community, specific subsample, and so on and so forth. If you had inclusion or exclusion criteria, that is something very important to specify as well. And then you should describe the data collection process. If you recruited this participant from somewhere and how. When we talk about ethical consideration, please remember that also in the thesis, like in the proposal, the ethical form is necessary for the thesis to be approved. So you must have taken proper care of filling it in at the beginning when you were still running the proposal, and you must have now filled it in, signed it, and appended it to the thesis. The final part of the chapter of methodology, which is the joining point to next chapter of data analysis, is methods of data analysis. Many students sometimes forget to include these in methodology. So I think a strong reminder should be put here that you must explain also how are you going to treat this data. In the methodology, you have said which tool did you use, which participants did you get, which data did you get out of these participants. Now we need to know how are you going to analyze them to answer your research question that was there at the beginning. Hope that, inshallah, is clear. So, in the data analysis, you should show the analysis of the data in the way you're going to do it. Preferably, you should also refer to some standards in the field that explain how that type of data should be analyzed. So, that is it concerning methodology. The last chapter we are going to talk about today is the issue of data analysis. Now, data analysis can differ a lot depending on your specific type of thesis. So this is one of those chapters where your supervisor will be able to help you more. There are some types of research where simply doing some tables and showing the difference in means with a t-test would be enough. There are some other studies in which you would need to use simple regression, multiple regression, analysis of variances. But the analysis should always have some specific aspects. It should follow the methods that are mentioned in the methodology section. It should include charts and tables only when necessary. This is another mistake I see very much in thesis, that for everything they collected, they put a histogram in the analysis chapter. We do not need that. We do need it only when it highlights a difference that is important, or when it highlights that there is no difference and we expected a difference. Charts and tables are only important when they provide meaning to us. There is no need to put a pie chart that says half males are females when you could have very easily written it in the text. Also, for each image, chart, table, for each statement of the p-value of a specific test, you should ideally provide a short explanation along with the specific result, not an interpretation, because that will come in the discussion and in the results that we are going to talk about next lesson, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.